Welcome, ladies and gents. I'm very pleased to be bringing another video in our webinar series, giving you a bit of a flavour of how we support pupils at Royal Alexandra and Albert School. We're going to be focusing on our pastoral care again, and many of you will have seen headlines and news articles relating to mental health in young people. Across the nation, we are worried about the number of young people who experience different forms of mental health concerns, and it's something we aim to tackle as thoroughly as we can, putting in lots of different steps to support pupils who might have any issues of any level. We're very lucky to have a very experienced counsellor team. Mary Kelly, who's joining me today, is one of our experienced counsellors, and I'd like to start off, Mary, by asking you a question just about, well, give a bit of background about you and maybe a little bit of a summary of what the counselling team do here at Royal Alexandra and Albert.
Sure, yes, thanks, Jay. So I've been working in the counselling team for several years now, and it's a really great service that we're lucky enough to have at RAS. My background is that before I trained as a general therapist, I was working specifically in bereavement. So I was working for Cruse Bereavement Care and also for Jigsaw South East, who are a charity working in child bereavement. Now in school, this is, sometimes very useful. So that's my background. And in the school service, we see children with all sorts of different mental health issues, and we're sometimes offering long-term support. Sometimes it's just a little bit of support in reaction to something that's going on. But there's a great deal of help available in the school, so it's a good place to work and a good place to be.
Absolutely. As a sort of pastoral lead within the school, I'm very grateful to have specialist experts in the field on hand in many schools. The only expert support you can get is via CAMS, and there are very long waiting lists. So we are very privileged to have experts on hand to support pupils as they navigate their way through any difficulties they might face. I'd like us to touch a little bit more on your specialty today, Mary, which is on bereavement. I think at the moment we obviously see that many families are experiencing bereavement in this very challenging time for not only our country but for the world. As a parent, it's something that fills me with a bit of fear, having to help my child through a process of bereavement, and even as a relative specialist, I suppose, compared to some people working with young people and pastoral care, it's a very difficult situation to have to deal with. And first of all, how would we open up to our child about bereavement? How do we talk to them about it? I mean, should we bring it up at all?
Well, I think like you, Joe, a lot of parents worry about this and feel fearful of opening up a conversation. You're worried that maybe you're going to open the floodgates, or they're going to ask you questions that you can't answer. And it's not an easy territory to go into. But, it is so important that we do talk about it. And even if your child doesn't seem to respond and doesn't really seem to want to talk to you about it, the fact that you are offering to have a conversation is important, because if you don't, you're sort of giving them the message that it's not okay to talk about these things and that they're taboo. And then if they are at some stage in need of some support, they will perhaps feel unable to approach you. So it's actually really important that you do talk about it. I think if you can get over that fear of not doing the right thing, it's a really good thing to do if you can. I guess that you'd rather that they talk to you about it than talk to somebody else. Absolutely.
And how do we go about starting that conversation? What kind of language would we use, and how would we break the news?
Well, breaking the news is another thing, really. But I suppose when it comes to talking about their response to knowing that someone's died, sometimes you can tell a child and it can be as if they haven't really registered that it's happened. And this is because naturally our first instinct is sort of shock and disbelief. So sometimes you have to say it a few times before it really sinks in. And this may feel strange and counterintuitive, but it's part of them being able to process it. And I think wondering with them about how they might be feeling is really helpful, because if you say to a child, I wonder if you're feeling really upset about this, then that's not instructing them that it would be right to feel upset, or it would be right to feel one way or another, but it's giving them the opportunity to tell you, because they'll pretty quickly tell you if that's not how they're feeling. So I think open questions, not putting your expectations of how they'll react into play, I suppose, but just being open. Yeah,
that's really helpful, and yeah, can be a very emotional, will be a very emotional conversation for us as parents. You know, what if we cry? Is it okay to show them that we're upset? You know, particularly for a father, but as well for a mother, you know, is it okay to show emotions and how you're feeling?
Well, this is a really interesting one, because I mean, everyone's different, and so your relationship with your child is going to be different from anyone else's. But I think as long as the child can see that you can cope with your emotions, you're not overwhelmed, it's really helpful for them to see that adults have strong emotions sometimes. Because if you think a child may be very unused to having strong feelings or strong upset feelings, and if they're suddenly having these feelings and they look around them and it seems like nobody else feels like that, they can begin to think, is there something wrong with me? Am I going a little mad? Because this is something that's happened, everyone else knows it's happened, and they're not reacting like this. So in fact, they're sort of able to take their lead from you, and by you saying or allowing them to see that you're upset, but reassuring them that it's, you know, it's okay. Of course I'm upset, but it's okay. I will be all right. And you'll probably feel upset, and that's okay too. You're giving them permission to grieve, but you're also helping them to feel safe in that, and to see it as a natural process. Actually, bereavement is not a mental illness; it's a natural process.
Absolutely, yeah. And if we're going through that process, we're obviously going to be keeping an eye on our child and how they're responding and how they're managing that. What are the signs that we need to look out for that they might not be coping with the bereavement?
Well, as I've just said, bereavement is a natural thing, and it would be well, I was going to say it would be surprising, but some children actually don't react hugely. Not everybody is going to need counselling or therapy. Not everybody is going necessarily to need to really talk about it. But I think what you're looking for is real changes in behaviour. So you might see tantrums and moodiness. So you might see a child who's normally very outgoing becoming very quiet, or the other way around. Sometimes I get a call from a parent saying, so-and-so's my son or daughter hasn't cried since they heard the news. They just go in their room and play games all the time. And I sort of say, well, what were they like before? Because you're not going to have a complete personality change. If they weren't the sort of person that showed when they were upset, they're not going to suddenly become that sort of person. But you're looking for changes. So I would be concerned if I was seeing changes, marked changes in appetite, in sleep patterns, and behaviour. But over a period of time, because some of that is natural. And I suppose, just as a guide, if a person doesn't return to normal functioning, by which I mean being able to learn, be able to eat, and in the adult's case work, and have relationships as they normally would after about 6 months, and that's the point at which that is becoming a diagnosable thing, and it's worth seeking professional help. But if it's day-to-day concerns, then it's always worth letting people at school know, so that we can come together around that child and provide any support.
Absolutely, yeah. I think in terms of who people might go to in school to seek that support, there's a whole whole group of individuals who work within the pastoral team that can provide a lot of that day-to-day support. We have their form tutor is the first port of call. the head of year will be able to provide support, as well as the head of school, and that pastoral team for our flexies will, and for our boarders as well, will be there to support. And then for boarders, we also have the boarding tutors and the heads of house who can help, and they can pitch in and give that support. And we also have, as well as your team of counsellors with Liz and Jacqueline that also work alongside you, we also have some other types of specialists with ELSAs that can help as well in school. But what can parents do outside of school, just with the normal bereavement process? What can they do to support their child through that?
Well, I think, as I said, opening up conversations, allowing the child to know that their feelings are acceptable, that it's okay to talk about it. Often it's important at the beginning to say, look, you might feel very upset, you might feel very angry, sometimes you might feel fine, and that's okay too. You don't have to feel really terrible or guilty if you don't feel upset. But helping them to think about how they feel and to normalise their emotions, that actually whatever comes up for them is okay and is natural. Helping them to know that if they are very upset, that although life never will be exactly the same without that person there, it won't always hurt like that. And I think that's important. And there are outside services. If you find it difficult as a parent to help and support your child, it's probably a good idea for you to get some support. Perhaps it's somebody that you're grieving for really badly, and then it's hard and more painful to see somebody else grieving. So there are services that you can go to as a parent, somebody to talk to, or that will step in and help with the family. So there's lots of help out there.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, there are a couple of things about, I think, how we talk to children about death that I'd like to mention, which is that there's a couple of things that we do. We tend to use language that softens. We think we're softening the blow. So we might talk about somebody going to sleep or passing away, or sometimes people will describe it as going home. And, for a young child, this can actually be really confusing and unhelpful because they won't necessarily understand what death is. And I've heard stories about children who've been told that their grandparent has gone to heaven, and then they're looking on a map to find out where heaven is. So, actually being prepared to have these conversations and explain and say, so-and-so has died and this is what it means and they're not coming back, is really important. And the other thing is that children have a tendency to, because of the way that they are, the stage of development that they're at, they can be very self-centered, and I don't mean that as a criticism, but they are the centre of their own world, of course, and so they can end up feeling really responsible. And so even if a child doesn't seem to be feeling guilty or responsible for something that's happened, it's actually very important that we say, this is not anything that you've done, this is nobody's fault, because a child can get into their head that maybe it was because they were naughty or they didn't try hard enough at something, or and actually even as adults we do this a bit, because we say, oh, what have I done to deserve this? And this is what we call sort of magical thinking, and it's very important that those thoughts don't go unchecked. So that's just a couple of things that I feel quite strongly about.
Absolutely. So it's really useful. I think it's natural for parents to try and want to soften the blow for their child. So that's really useful to know that it's actually going to be detrimental if we do that rather than helping.
It really is. I know it's hard to go there. And also the other thing is we tend to say things like, I've heard people say, well, Daddy wouldn't want you to be upset that he's not here, or Granny wouldn't want to see you cry, or you've got to be a big brave boy or a big brave girl or whatever. This is really difficult. This is problematic, because then the child, they are going to feel sad, but then they feel guilty that they feel sad. And so using that sort of judgmental language is really counterproductive when we're trying to help children process these difficult feelings.
Yeah, thank you. That's incredibly insightful and very useful for parents. I know across the country, many more families are experiencing loss at the moment. And we know of, obviously, we've spoken about some of our community that have unfortunately experienced loss at this time, either from coronavirus or from other causes. And having you and the other counsellors on board has been really helpful in supporting our families and our community through this tricky time. And I know that you also do some YouTube videos for the wider audience, so we'll try and include some links if parents did want to watch some of those YouTube videos, which are very, very informative, longer and probably more detailed about some of those things that we've touched upon during our short conversation.
Could I just add one more thing, which probably should, which is particularly at the time of this pandemic, even more so than usual. When a child experiences the death of someone that they know, it brings up a level of awareness of their own mortality and their mortality of everyone around them. So suddenly they can feel very, very insecure, and they can be worried about, are they going to die themselves? Are their parents going to die? Whatever. And this is really scary. So there is a big need for reassurance, for comforting, and this is where it's quite useful. I often find it very useful to say to young children, actually, people generally live a long time. And if you look at the average life expectancy, it's 79 for men and 83 for women in this country. So, by and large, that's reassuring. So I think that's an important point.
It is, and it's a positive point to end on, that for many of us we will have long and hopefully happy lives, and that's something that we need to continue to share with our children and help them to enjoy each moment of that long and hopefully happy life. Thank you very much for joining me, Mary, and thank you for sharing so much of your expertise. I know that'll be really helpful for some parents. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.